Welcome to what some of Annual Meeting 2020 would have been like last week. Hopefully you received an agenda which really has the bulk of the information that we're going to be looking at or dealing with in terms of the business aspect of the Atlantic Conference this year. But this video, as well as some other things that are in the email you have just received, is meant to give you some additional information to what you've already received. So in this, you'll receive this intro from me that you're watching. The National Director, Alan Robinson, has also included a video that would sponsor some of what he put in there. Also, you're going to see a video from an established church. We thought about last year's theme of the power of partnership and wondered how churches were using that. And so we asked a local church that's a more established church how they interacted in those ways. And they've created a video about the power of partnership between them and some areas in the local community. You'll also see a link to one of the newest church plants, Erica Henry at the Holy District in Allentown. And then there are two other things that have to do more with the business aspect of this time. One is a link for all of the decisions that we need you all as delegates to respond to. I believe there's 3 things on there that you'll respond to. And then the other is a way to ask questions. Maybe you've read some things, heard some things, and you have some questions. We're going to try to interact around those as well. So certainly this is a different way to interact around annual meeting than I was expecting. And there's some disappointment to that, but you all are experiencing that in your local context as well in terms of what you've been experiencing over these last weeks. But in spite of that, I really look for this as a way to move forward and to keep the mission of Jesus moving forward, both locally and in a broad way. In the week or two leading up to this time of social isolation, I had been reading Jeremiah in the mornings. Is just kind of where I was and reading through the Bible. If you're looking for a pick-me-up, I'm not necessarily suggesting that's where you start, but that's where I happen to be. It was a bit of a harder book to get through in some ways. But I'm just reading about God and how he's interacting with the group of people at that time, the Israelites, especially the nation of Judah, that were unfaithful to him. And man, just reading that, reading about Jerusalem, the destruction of that city, reading about the temple, the place where God's dwelling was, and what took place there, just all of these high places and areas for God's people, and how that took place and what happened during those days. Then right at the end of Jeremiah, even God through Jeremiah pronounces some proclamation against some of the nations around, even some of the nations that God used in some of these ways. Again, stuff I don't fully understand, stuff I don't want to dwell on too much, but I was trying to kind of, what should I learn from this, living the experiences with those people. And then I finish up Jeremiah and I get into Lamentations. So I've just been journeying all of that way and then get into the book of Lamentations, which follows right afterwards. And I get to the very first verse. And here's what that first verse says in the book of Lamentations. The city of Jerusalem is so empty. It used to be full of people. Now again, I had been on this journey for a while. I hadn't really been looking for anything specifically that might speak into what we're dealing with today, just trying to identify with what's taking place. And there was the result. The city of Jerusalem is so empty. It used to be full of people. That was something I could identify with. That was a statement that I got. And not just where I am and where you might be located, but saw things on the internet, like what's going on in Italy and the city of Rome and just the empty streets of Rome. Many of us are not out and about in many of the ways that we would have been previously. In many spaces and places, they're empty. Now, to be clear, I'm not equating all that took place in Jeremiah or why it took place in Jeremiah with what's going on today, especially what occurred in Jerusalem, but the result, that image of an empty city. That's what captured me. That was the image that I was really drawn to, that struck me. And after that, even in Lamentations, there's line after line of pain, of loss, the reality of what this new context is like, the new place they're in. There's a remembering, there's a lamenting. And that leads up to chapter 3. And beginning in verse 21, I just want to read these words. Think about the context and then hear these words. But here is something else I remember, and it gives me hope. The Lord loves us very much. So we haven't been completely destroyed. His loving concern never fails. His great love is new every morning. Lord, how faithful you are. Verse 24, I say it to myself, the Lord is everything I will ever need. So I will put my hope in him. To be reading those lines in the midst of the context of everything that had happened before, kind of the weeks for me and my own personal journey leading up, and then all of a sudden this turn of events of like, yeah, all of that, but I will remember this as well. And to hear those lines in those circumstances, and then to think about today, just hear them again. Lamentations 3, verses 21 through 24. But here is something else I remember, and it gives me hope. The Lord loves us very much. So we haven't been completely destroyed. His loving concern never fails. His great love is new every morning. Lord, how faithful you are. I say to myself, the Lord is everything I will ever need. So I will put my hope in him. I speak those words to myself, to all of you, and not just in this present context, but really for me as I think about our last year of ministry together. And I think back over what took place in the Atlantic Conference. There certainly were highs and lows. And some of those lows I would not wish to relive. They were painful for me, for others across the conference, even for whole churches. There were some painful things, and yet there were also some areas of great joy and fresh opportunity. God's love, his mercy was new morning after morning. I experienced that personally. I experienced that in the midst of highs and lows. I hope you can relate to that as well. What you received in the agenda is just a high-level summary of those things with a few details thrown here or there. But you know as well as I do, anytime you try to do a high-level summary of something, what we're actually talking about is just life. It's people, it's relationships, it's the mission of Jesus being lived out in a context. That's what that agenda, those notes are all about. It's just life, it's people. It's us living the Jesus life together, serving one another, serving and expanding his kingdom. We've done that together over this past year, influencing the places where he has planted us, the towns, the streets, the neighborhoods that we move through day by day, and will again at some point. We have done that through pulling our resources together through a ministry we have in common. That's church planting. That's raising up leaders. That's supporting one another. That's accountability structures. It's sending people all over the globe for Jesus. We've done that individually as followers of Jesus, and we've done that as collective groups of people as we form the local churches across this conference and across our nation and around the world. Thank you for doing so. It's a privilege to serve alongside you. So whether the streets are empty or teeming with life, the Lord is everything we will ever need. So we put our hope in him. Continue in that hope. Thanks.